Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is James Carouso, chairman of the Advisory Council to the Australia Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. James, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure, Brittany.
We saw a horrific incident in Sydney, Australia unfold over the weekend. Two gunmen opened fire at a Hanukkah celebration on Bondi Beach. As of now, at least 15 people have died and at least 29 people were injured in the anti-Semitic attack. So to start off the conversation, what is your reaction to the incident?
Well, of course, it's horrific. Bondi Beach has a special meaning for Australians. It's a symbol of a beach culture, and Bondi's at its center. It's a place of joy, of family celebrations. And that's one reason the Jewish community of Bondi, which is a lot of Jewish people live there, would go there for Hanukkah. So whether these gunmen realized it or not, they were attacking part of the very soul of Australia in going after an iconic place like Bondi.
I mean, the shooting was just horrific. And as you said, the location being Bondi Beach and what that represents makes it all the more tragic. But this really comes as we've seen a global rise in anti-Semitism since October 7th, 2023, and the president of the National Council of Jewish Women, Australia, reportedly told this to the Times of Israel. I'm horrified and devastated that this happened, but not shocked. And she added that over the past 2 years, anti-Semitism has been rising by the month, and the government has not listened to our pleas. As an expert here on all things Australia, did you anticipate something like this happening?
Well, it's not whether I anticipated it, but if you go and look at what the head of ASIO, which is the Australian equivalent of the FBI, has said as early as February of this year, he has anticipated communal violence increasing. The terrorism level in Australia is set at probable. So they weren't totally taken by a surprise, because as you noted, since October of 2023, anti-Semitism has been on the rise all over the world, in Europe, in the U.S., and unfortunately not in Australia either.
I mean, it's just horrible. Do you think that Jewish people are safe in Australia?
It's one of those things where you say they're safe until they're not. I have friends who are saying we need to hire security for our boys' bar mitzvah. Synagogues are hiring security. The government says they're doing more, and they probably are. But when you have an attack on your community like this, simply because of who you are, of your faith, it's hard to feel safe anywhere.
And the Australian Prime Minister said that there's no evidence that the suspected gunmen, who were a father and son duo, were part of a wider terror cell, but they were clearly, is what he said, motivated by extremist ideology. Based on your expertise, does Australia have an extremism problem?
I don't think they have an extremism problem more than other countries have extremism problems. The U.S. has groups that advocate violence. Europe has those groups, and unfortunately, so does Australia. Something to keep in mind, Australia has about more than 30% of its population is foreign-born. More than 3% of the population is of the Islamic faith, much larger than the U.S., which is about 1%. A lot of those are recent arrivals. Do they arrive with a more radical view? I don't know, but it's been a problem. And after 9/11, Islamophobia was the problem. Now we have the same group who seem to be radicalized by the events of October and Gaza. It's so hard to say what motivates an individual to do something so insane and so horrible.
And according to the Prime Minister, this son in this father-son duo is Australian born, and he was flagged to Australian intelligence back in 2019. I know hindsight is 2020, but do you think that the government could have done anything to prevent this?
Oh, it's so hard to say. They have a lot of people on the list. They identified this individual. Presumably, they were looking at him and decided he wasn't a threat. I guess what concerns me is once they determined there were guns in the home, maybe that was a sign they should have at least paid more attention to that. But I really hesitate to criticize them.
Australia saw its deadliest mass shooting back in 1996 in Port Arthur, and there were really strict gun laws that went into place after that shooting. There was a massive program to buy back guns. It bought back hundreds of thousands of guns from Australians, and there was a near total ban on automatic and semi-automatic weapons. So what happened here, do you think? And after this shooting at Bondi Beach, the Prime Minister said that he would take whatever actions necessary, including tougher gun laws. So do you think that Australia could, would, and should see tougher gun laws in place after this?
I don't know. I'm just to go further into Australian gun control laws. If you have a gun, you have to demonstrate on a yearly basis that you keep it locked up, that you know how to use it, that no one else can get access to it. So they are very, very strict. The thing about this situation was this individual was a member of a gun club. So were the guns kept in his home or at the club? Having 6 guns is highly unusual. How did he get access to 6 guns? So I don't know if it's the laws that need to be strengthened or the oversight.
And then, based on your expertise in Australia in general, what do you think the political implication for this is, if you think there is one?
Well, you mentioned 1996, and when all the political parties from left to right all agreed on new, very strict gun laws. I guess I'm hoping that in the aftermath of this disaster, all the political parties can come together and decide, okay, how to divide hate speech and free speech is a very difficult problem, but let's tackle it together. Let's figure out how to bring our community together and keep those parties who are trying to fracture our social cohesion, keep them from doing so, bring our community together as Australians. So that's what I'm hoping politically.
And then when you look at when there's a terror attack in America versus when there's one perhaps in Australia, I mean, what are the differences in responses, do you think?
Well, when I was in Australia, one of the questions I got most frequently was, what's with you Americans and your love of guns? They really couldn't understand. Because when I was there, for instance, if you remember the Las Vegas shooting and all the people who died there, and no change in gun laws in the U.S. So sort of the shoes on the other foot, are they going to do something more in the wake of this tragedy?
And do you think that there's appetite for that? Because the Prime Minister, he essentially said he's going to look into whatever needs to be done.
I think there is. Again, my concern is it the gun laws that are the problem, or is it the division in society that's the bigger problem?
It seems like Netanyahu thinks that it's the latter there. He had some tough words for Australia's Prime Minister. He said, your government did nothing to stop the spread of anti-Semitism in Australia. You took no action. You let the disease spread, and the result is the horrific attacks on Jews we saw today. Do you think that Netanyahu's right to put some of the blame on the Prime Minister there? What do you think that looks like?
Well, this gets back to how much speech is free speech. So there was a massive demonstration in Sydney some time ago where the crowds were shouting Palestine from sea to sea and globalize the intifada. So, should the government have stepped in and arrested people or prohibited the demonstration? Where does free speech end? Should the government maybe have done more to publicize a different narrative from what the demonstrators were talking about? Maybe. There are ways to bring a conversation about that doesn't result in violence. I guess that's what the Jewish community was hoping for. But you can't protect every single Jewish person walking down the street.
And then, as we said earlier in this conversation, that there is a rise in anti-Semitic attacks around the globe. This problem isn't uniquely Australian. So when you're looking at America, what advice would you have for the Trump administration? How would you want them to respond?
Well, I think given the number of mass shootings we have in the United States, the call from the American people for sensible gun laws seems to be, once again, something that should be brought forward. And I think we also have our own social cohesion problems, as you're well aware, Brittany. And maybe we need a national conversation about what makes us all American, despite our differences, and talk about unity instead of what's different about us.
And who do you think should call for that? Because, I mean, as you said, this is really a divided time in this nation, right? I mean, people are divided against political lines, amongst others. Do you think that there could be a real call to bring down the temperature that would really be listened to?
You know, President Trump, it's almost like a Nixon goes to China moment. If President Trump called for this and reached out to Chuck Schumer and said, let's have a meeting together and call for this sort of unity, call for a way forward, boy, that would have a real effect, wouldn't it?
I mean, that's just something that we could all hope for, that people just around the globe and America, starting at home, bring the temperature down, have a more productive dialogue, and hopefully that happens. But James Carouso, thank you so much for joining me. And as we see developments here and elsewhere, I hope you can come back on for another conversation. I appreciate the time.
Good talking to you, Brittany.